Okay. That better?
Yeah, much better.
All right, great. Okay, so I'm actually going to repeat some of the things that you said, because I think a lot of these talks are very similar. I'll come out right out and say in the beginning that imposter syndrome, yeah, it's a bad thing. Totally have it too. Everyone's going to figure me out. I'm currently an automation and tools engineer at HP, and I work on the OpenStack project. Total fraud there, by the way. A little bit about my speaking experience. I gave a keynote at FOSSCon, which is a little open source conference in Philadelphia a couple years ago. I gave a talk at OSCON this past year, and then I speak at Scale pretty regularly. This is one of the talks I did. That's the Southern California Linux Expo. I'm giving 2 talks again this year, next month. I also often speak at universities and schools. I'm particularly proud of this because I never went to school. I mean, I went to high school and I finished that, but I never went to university, so it's really funny for me when I get to go talk at them. So that's a little bit about myself. Last year I counted up, I did 10 talks around lots of different conferences and things last year, and with this conference and Scale next month, I will already have hit 5 by the end of February, so. Yeah, right? This is my second talk of this conference. I'm doing one tomorrow, too. So I do a lot of speaking. And if you had told this to my high school self, I would have just laughed at you, because I'm really shy. And my website is princessleia.com, so I'm kind of a nerd. And I have like all the stories of like teenage nerdiness. I have all those stories. So I was shy, and I was not liking the whole public speaking thing. So I wanted to go through a few myths that were busted as I went through my public speaking adventure. I guess I'd started doing public speaking probably about 6 years ago, and my first talks were really bad. I was really scared, and I never practiced. I wrote my slides. I wrote really great slides, but I wouldn't practice because I didn't really understand that was a thing you're supposed to do. Plus, it's funny, like I'm going to present to my cats, right? So there's all these myths floating around in my head about public speaking. So my first talks weren't very good. And I had this fear that the audience wouldn't like me, which is a very strange fear, I think. When you walk into a talk, you sort of assume that the person standing in the front of the room is an expert. Presumably they were selected by a panel of conference people or lug admins or something. Some person who thinks that they have expertise. I can't think of a time when I've gone into a talk and thought the person didn't know what they were talking about. So you have to understand, so first I had to understand that, when I go into a talk, do I assume people are stupid? No, I assume the person knows what they're talking about. Also, when people walk into talks, they generally do it because they want to learn something. If they're there to heckle, then they're not actually your audience. They're a bad person, and you don't want to pay attention to what they think. Most people want to learn. They are on your side. And more importantly, when I started learning how to speak, sometimes I'd tell the audience that I was new to speaking. And that gets a lot of sympathy. A lot of people who are in the audience have never given a talk before, so they understand how scary it can be, or maybe they don't understand, but they imagine how scary it can be. So they'll have sympathy for you taking the risk of going up there and making yourself vulnerable in front of a room full of people. I've also done a few things to try to sort of humanize myself in front of the audience. I was at a talk several months ago, and it was a talk about OpenStack for Code Chicks. So the audience had lots of women in it, and I was so excited. So I took a picture of the audience, and that instantly made it all much more friendly feeling, because now I'm a person who's I'm totally tweeting this. So it's sort of doing humanizing things. You get a lot of sympathy from the audience. And plus, the guy who stands up and talks about himself for 10 minutes, no one likes that commenter. So you get sympathy when you get bad commenters, too, in your talk. So they not only like you, but they are on your side from the beginning. Another one, you have to know everything. It turns out that's not possible, because I tried, and you can't. I also, like Karen, I had this fear that I'd give a talk, and at the end there would be a question I wouldn't know how to answer. And that would invalidate everything I said, the whole talk. And then they'd all find out that I didn't know what I was talking about. And then I started I started thinking about this, and I was like, have I ever been bothered by a speaker saying, I don't know to a question? No, because you don't know everything, and speakers are not people who know everything either. And so I started saying things like, I would say, I don't know, or, I know who to ask, or email me later and we can find out the answer together, because I still wasn't strictly okay with saying I don't know. But it turns out it really is just okay to say I don't know. That's the end, next question. But this stopped me from talking and giving talks for a long time because I was really afraid of this. So don't let that happen to you. And this is one of my favorites. Good speakers don't need to practice. So I mentioned that I didn't really practice early on because I didn't really understand that that was a thing. And I'd go to all these Linux conferences, and these guys would be around, because it was mostly guys, and they'd be like, oh, I haven't even written my slides yet, and they'd be bragging about all that. And I'd be like, well, so you don't need to practice, because obviously if you're writing the slides the night before, you're not practicing. So it took me until I read this book, Confessions of a Public Speaker. I forget the author, but it's very, very good. And this guy who wrote it, he's a former tech guy, and he does public speaking for a living now. So the book is all about sort of myths that he learned along the way. And one of them was about practicing. And he said it was something like he practices 8 times as much as the talk is. So, for an hour-long talk, he practices for 8 hours. And that was sort of revolutionary to me, because I didn't really understand that that was a thing, and then understanding that not only is it a thing, but even professional public speakers are doing this thing, made me realize that maybe I should start practicing. And then once I started practicing, I became a much better speaker. There's lots of things you learn when you practice. About the flow of your slides. Every single time I do a slide deck, it's not right when I first do it. You have to practice it, and then you change the wording around, you fix up the flow. Also things like introducing yourself. I was so bad at that. I know what I want to say, but if I don't practice what I'm going to say, I say just crazy things. Or things that don't make sense, or I skip over important things, like that I have a job. So yeah, this was a huge one for me, learning that you actually do need to practice. And people do have their own styles. Anita was up here giving a talk earlier, and she's amazing. She never practices, I don't think. She just writes her slides 5 minutes before the talk and gets up there and is amazing. So some people really don't, but most people do, and that's okay. Yep.
I'm just going to add that if you are speaking a lot, that is practice.
Yeah. Yes, certainly. So if you're speaking a lot, that is practice, yeah. Oh, good speakers don't get nervous. Yeah, that's a total lie. I get nervous every time. It's especially frustrating because I'd get nervous, and then I'd get nervous about being nervous, because obviously if I was a good speaker, then I wouldn't get nervous. And then it was just this whole, it was really bad. So actually I learned that in that Confessions of a Public Speaker book as well, that it's okay to get nervous, and the key is just understanding that you're going to be nervous and just handling it. Take deep breaths, have a drink. No, I'm just kidding. Do whatever you can just to relax and slow down. I also had to learn some things. I actually started watching videos of myself giving talks, which is the most horrible thing. But I learned that I laugh when I'm nervous. And also when I get confused or don't know what to say next, it feels like forever if you stop. Collecting yourself. But if you watch a video of yourself, when you thought it was 5 minutes you paused for, it was really a second. So I had to learn things like learning how to pause instead of laughing. I still laugh sometimes. But just sort of nervous tics that you learn from watching your videos, as horrible and hard as it is. But yeah, we all get nervous. I don't think I'll ever stop getting nervous about giving talks. This is another good one. Shy people make poor speakers. No, that's not true at all. You may have seen me hiding over in the corner there for all afternoon. I'm very shy. And anyone can talk to me later. I'm not antisocial. I'm really awkward. So public speaking was really scary for me because I'm shy. But it turns out sort of my version of shyness is because I don't know how to act in a certain social situation. Like, I don't know how to go and say hi to someone, because I'm like, what if, I have crazy things in my head. It's just, I have trouble. But it turns out, in a public speaking situation, I know what my role is, I know what I'm supposed to be doing, and that makes it so much easier for me to talk to people, because I know exactly what the protocol is, and I know what's expected of me, and it's all pretty simple in my head. Also, when I speak at conferences, people talk to me. First, they don't think I'm someone's girlfriend, because I got the speaker badge. And two, they have something to talk to me about. They'll come up to me after my talk, or if they ask a question, I can approach them later, and I have something to say. I know how to say, hey, that was a great question, I want to talk to you more about, whatever. So I found that I enjoy conferences more when I'm speaking, just because I don't feel like I belong there, and I feel like I have something to talk to people about. There's a funny story about this. I was giving a talk on doing open source for your career at a conference in October, and I mentioned this whole shyness thing and going to conferences and stuff. And afterwards, this one guy came up to me and he's like, I don't even go to conferences where I'm not speaking anymore. Same exact reason. He's like, I'm shy and I don't like going to conferences where I don't know anyone and I'm not speaking. So it was interesting to learn that I'm not the only one here. So if you're shy, it's better to speak. Your talk must be completely original. That's another myth, and that one is one that stopped me from talking for a while, because I didn't have something completely original, or the thing I had to talk about wasn't completely original enough to meet my ridiculous standards of originalness. It turns out there's a lot of conferences, and even Linux users groups and other things that have beginners tracks, or are interested in just you worked on something for 3 months, come talk to us about it. You don't need to be an expert. It doesn't need to be something you know everything about, again. It can just be something interesting that you were working on. And everyone in the audience, maybe they didn't have time to spend 3 months on it, but it's something interesting to you and something interesting to the audience. So it definitely doesn't need to be original. I also did some small talks about configuring Apache early on. And that's something I was like, I can't do a talk on this because it's so easy and everyone can do it. And there's 1,000 YouTube videos about it. But that doesn't matter. There's beginners tracks and there's places to give these talks, and they are valuable to people, even if you might think they're too easy or they're not at all original. So and I gave an OpenStack workshop for a bunch of people recently, and I actually just downloaded someone else's slides because it was so unoriginal that I didn't even need to make slides. But it was super valuable. It was a really great afternoon. And a little bit on this original thing, you can also give the same talk multiple times, which is so awesome. I just learned this. I feel like such a fraud. Go to all these conferences and give the same talk, which is great because you already have sort of that practice built in and you just need to polish it up a few days before. And I get great responses every single time I give this same talk over and over again. Not this one, but actually the one I'm giving tomorrow. So yeah, it can be unoriginal and you can do it over and over again. And I went very fast. There's lots of other excuses not to give talks. One of my favorite ones of my own is that at some point in my trying to get myself to go give talks, I got the idea that I had to go to Toastmasters first. Toastmasters is an international group that has clubs all over the place where people sort of get up and do speaking, and then the audience sort of gives them critical constructive criticism of what their talk is to help them improve and be better speakers. So I thought, well, I can't give a talk until I go to Toastmasters. So I was living in sort of Pennsylvania, not really close to a city at the time, and there weren't many groups around for Toastmasters, and then I found one, and then I missed that one, and then I couldn't go to another one because I was busy. And then there was one I could go to, but then I totally chickened out. And this is over the course of a year, right? I'm totally going to go to Toastmasters someday, and that will solve all my speaking worries. But at a certain point, I realized that I was totally using that as an excuse. And I shouldn't have been doing that. I mean, Toastmasters is great, and people should go to it because they're a great organization. But don't use things like that as an excuse, because it doesn't really help, and it won't get you out there and speaking. And actually, that was all I had. I think I only thought it was 20 minutes.
Yes, well, it's sort of, they're 20-minute speaking slots, but there's room for changeover and questions. And all
Cool.
that stuff built in as well.
So this is not really a question, it's more continuance of the discussion to address 2 points. The first one was the idea that you don't have to know everything. So I had actually one of my worst absolute fears about public speaking come true one time, which is that I was in Israel giving a talk I'm a tour developer, and so I was giving a talk about tour to a room full of Israeli cryptographers, which is, these are some really, truly brilliant people who already knew the topic I was talking about, some parts of it perhaps much more well than I did. And so I was very scared when I went and I gave the talk, and I'm not trying to stereotype about Israelis, but if you tell them, feel free to interrupt me during my talk if you have any questions, then they will do that. And if you don't know the answer, then they're going to press you. And so this is exactly what happened. They were like, okay, excuse me, wait, I have a question. And I tried to answer it, but I didn't really know the answer, and I didn't realize I didn't know the answer to the degree that they wanted until I was like halfway through, and they started to grill me, And you know what? It wasn't that bad. At the end, yeah, they expected me to know, and I didn't know. And then they still afterwards came up and said, oh, it was a really great talk. We really enjoyed it because of, it was entertaining, and you knew all of this other stuff. And, so it actually turned out pretty well. And the second point was the idea that speakers don't need to practice. Because it's true, a lot of people say, oh yeah, I haven't done my slides, or I just need to finish them, and I'm hungover and I'm giving my talk. And honestly, a lot of those talks are really terrible. So it's not, so that's true that some speakers don't practice, and the rest of us suffer for it. So, so yes, I appreciate you destroying that myth.
Yeah, and I'd also say, sometimes when I start worrying about something, I'll be like, okay, what is the worst thing that could happen? Like being grilled by the Israelis or something, what is the worst thing that could happen? And of course, I go then I'll get fired from my job. No, really, yeah, it could be embarrassing or off-putting. I also noticed that some audiences are much different. So that was obviously an audience that was more sort of in-your-face, sort of grilling type.
Yeah.
But I also noticed I live in San Francisco, and the Silicon Valley Linux users group, they are brutal sometimes. You just get certain people in the audience who really want to talk about themselves, and they're not there really to talk, have the talk, listen to the talk. And they can be a really hostile audience, which is a complete opposite to what I've experienced here. And someone told me that before they got there. They're like, oh, LCA, I love that conference. Everyone's so nice, and the audiences are great. So it definitely depends on the audience, too. And I've sort of had to train myself to just be like, if there's that one person who's being terrible in the audience, they're the one, I don't have to worry about them. Most people, I think, are going to be okay and nice. So, yeah.
I think sometimes the best talks to prepare for where you really need to prepare are kind of these temperature talks, because they are just 5 minutes or 6 minutes and 40 seconds, and you have the time slide, so you really need to make it get the timing right, and that's when you really need to practice.
Yeah. Plus, it only takes 5 minutes to practice.
Well, 10 times.
Yeah, right.
At least
10 times.
Thinking about how you said you've got to, you think, what's the worst thing that could possibly happen? So it's a long story, but I ended up doing some anxiety training, and one of it is for kids, and this is one of the things they teach the kids to do who have anxiety. They say, what is the worst possible thing that you can think of? And I mean, kids with anxiety catastrophize, right? So they will come up with, a dinosaur will fall on me and eat my kneecaps. They will come up with the most amazing stuff. And what they then had to do, they had a ladder, and they had to say, how far up the ladder do you think this is likely to happen? And so, the dinosaur falling out of the sky would be right up top of the ladder, and I might slip over and hit my head, it was fairly flat, down the other end. And so, yeah, it actually made them try to sort of apply this realistic thinking to these amazing fears that they had. So, yeah, I actually, it's a kid's system, right? But I absolutely use exactly the same system myself. So, oh my God, what is the worst possible thing that could happen, and how actually likely is that going to be?
Yeah, and like I said, even when the worst possible thing does happen, it's actually not even as bad as you thought it would be.
Yeah.
I don't know, I mean, I would like to add this and you guys might not. I was thinking about it at one stage I was giving my presentation, I was thinking what the worst can happen is I will blank out. I will not be able to pull myself back. This happened. And then I said, ooh, this was really bad. And that shattered me. And then this happened again in the very next.
Wow.
And that destroyed my self-confidence at that stage. And what the hell was that? I used to speak throughout my life. And suddenly this starts happening. And it was a complete blackout. Like, everyone was looking at me and I couldn't pull back. It was so. So for that, the key is practice, and practice with your peers, with your friends, unknown faces. Even though I practiced that through talks like n number of times in a closed room in front of the mirror, whatever, but still it was completed. So hopefully that never happens. So time is okay. But as you said, practice is the key. The more you speak, it can happen 5 times or 6 times. The one day you speak.
Practicing.
Maybe it's just a foreign language, because English is not my mother tongue. So the should, could, may, sometimes could go at the wrong places.
Actually, it's a fusion.
Say it, sorry?
The fact that English is,
Not my mother tongue.
yeah, it's a fusion, it's not a fact. So you can say whatever you want. At least for me, let's say
Yeah,
sorry, this is a good language. So.
But that's
Yeah.
fine. You can say that, but
Yeah.
sometimes, as we were saying, it was not making any sense to the audience. And what I was looking at the practice from. So those kind of things can sometimes destroy yourself. That's my 2 cents.
Just a question, like when you do your speech and you notice like someone is leaving, do you get distracted or nervous about this?
Sorry.
Yes, sorry. And for example, when you notice people are just using their computers, or does when you do your speech, do you make like an eye contact with someone, or you just like a vague view, or how it works?
I try just a few, like make sure. No? Who?
No, sorry, yeah.
Oh yeah, like people who look like they're engaged or nodding or smiling, because they're my friends. Well, they are now. And I don't really get bothered by people leaving. I mean, if there was like mass exodus from the room, I might get bothered, but that's never happened. That's one of the worst things that can happen. Is everyone just leaves, or no one's there. Well, that's actually not so bad.
I've done 1 or 2 talks where I've stood up front, there's like 2 people in there, and it's like, great, this feels very informal now, and the fact that I actually have slides, it seems kind of ridiculous.
I was scheduled against a keynote once. My talk was the only one that was at the same time as the keynote, and there weren't very many people there. But then, so I was just like, oh man. So one of my friends was like there with me. She's like, this means that everyone here really wants to go to your talk. They're skipping the keynote for you. And I was like, okay, that's much better. I'm good.
Yeah, they can workshop it, so they could.
Yeah, like everyone come closer. Let's
Yeah,
talk.
and you can make it so much more informal, and it's a lot more fun.
Yeah.
I got scheduled up against Beta and Linux, Yale. And it's like, rockets or documentation?
You should have combined and had documentation.
Documentation. I wish I'd thought of that.